It's trying. There it is. We are live with episode 35 of Chatting with Nuts on this beautiful, at least here on the East Coast of the United States, Saturday afternoon. We have never done a Chatting with Nuts on a Saturday, unless if I'm forgetting my own lore, which is possible. But I am accompanied today by one of my favorite content creators in the Malaz universe, but also has branched out and covered some other series that I love and also don't love, which is great. And I think is one of the most well-spoken people here on the platform of YouTube talking about books, and that is Raph. Raph, how are you, my friend?
Hello, my friend. I am good in this afternoon. Well, it's evening now. It's 8 p.m. out here in Germany. And what can I say? Congratulations to 9,000 subscribers, my friend.
Thank you. You know, I was kind of looking at the counter going up, and then I just didn't look because yesterday I had some stuff going on, so I was really busy. And this morning it was like I was getting my coffee. I'm like, holy shit, we just hit 9,000. Like it's here. It's finally done. It feels like 10,000 is around the corner now.
Yeah, I've just seen like Mike over at Mike's Book Reviews is doing his 75,000 subscribers live stream right now, so only 66,000 behind him.
Yeah, wow. I mean, you know, he's been at it for a really long time, and it is cool because, you know, that's someone who has stuck to the books, right? He's really, I mean, he does some other stuff, but for the most part stuck to the books. And it's just amazing to me, one, that I can get 9,000 people that, you know, enjoy what I do, but then to see some of the bigger booktubers is so incredible because it's just like, you know, our community is a little bit bigger than we thought it was, you know?
It definitely is bigger than we all thought when we started out with this. That's true.
Yeah, but dude, I was talking to my wife just before I came up here, and I said, do you remember when I said I just wanted to hit 500 subs so I could have like a little core group of people to talk to? And she said, yeah. And then I remember you said that about 1,000, and then you said about 2,000. And it's interesting because like my goal has never been to be a YouTuber per se. I just wanted to talk to people, and I do enjoy the creative aspects of this quite a bit because even though I'm wrong a lot of the times, I like to get my thoughts out there and then have people tell me I'm wrong and then learn from that. Like we're learning in real time when we put ourselves out here.
I mean, I started my thing basically on a whim. I was on Iskar Jarak's chat, like Discord server, and he did that whole like challenge of try to sum up the Malazan Book of the Fallen spoiler free. And he did that, and I was like, one evening I was drinking beer and I'm like, I could do that. And it just like hit go and recorded the thing and uploaded it. And like 2 days later, Stephen Erikson had commented under the thing. And I'm like, oh shit.
Which is incredible.
I guess I better do something now.
You know, I do believe that a lot of the best things that have happened in humanity started with, well, I had some beer.
Yeah.
The liquid courage. You're having a drink right now. What are you drinking?
I am drinking mead that I made myself.
Oh, you made it yourself.
Yeah, I've done this a couple of times. It started out as another one of those, like, I had an idea. All the way back when I lived somewhere else with my flatmate. We both came back from, like, the winter holidays, and we're just sitting there in those, like, couple of days between Christmas and New Year's, and we're, like, having a couple of drinks, like, you know what, let's make mead. And we're like, what do we actually need for that? And then we just like walked to the next village and bought like a 30-liter barrel to start making mead in.
That's awesome.
And spent like New Year's Day slightly hungover doing exactly that, making mead, like taking honey out of like glasses and putting it into like this huge barrel. And
that's incredible. So I actually had mead for the first time at the Ren Fair last year, and so I've always wanted to drink mead just because it's fantasy. I mean, let's be honest. Like in fantasy, they're always drinking mead, and you know, I know that that's not the only place it's obviously drank. But for me, every time I pick up a really good classical fantasy, I'm like, man, I wish I had a mug of mead. So when I saw it at the Ren Fair, I grabbed it, and it was delightful. I loved it.
Yeah, I was like, should I actually take one of my drinking horns for this? And the problem with drinking horns is that they're kind of hard to actually put down.
That's why you never stop. You just keep drinking, right?
There is that. So I went for this glass, which don't tell anyone, but I stole that in Athens.
Well, now the secret's out.
Yeah, by accident. So, you know, it's like you're in a bar and you're having a couple of beers and then someone is like, "Oh, let's go," and like halfway down the next block, you realize that you still have like half a beer in your hand. And I'm like, "Oh."
Unfortunately, my core audience actually is Athens police officers. So, you will have to be careful the next time you arrive.
Well, that was in Exarchia. I'm pretty sure they don't go there.
Twainen wants to know, Raph, where are you from? You said a German drinking beer. What a surprise. But he'd like to know where you're from.
I am in Germany. Yes. It's a town called Marburg that's close to Frankfurt, like dead center. And I'm not drinking beer. As I said, I'm drinking mead.
Mead, yes. And there is a difference. I'm not going to lie to you, Raph. I didn't know that until about 2 years ago. Like, whenever I saw other people actually drinking mead, I was like, oh, it's just beer, because I don't really like beer that much. And they're like, no, you're an idiot. And I was like, oh, okay, fair.
No, this is basically, it's more made like wine. It's super easy to make yourself, basically. You just need water, honey, and yeast.
Yes, and some determination, right?
Well, basically, you just need to wait for it to actually become alcohol.
And then you can drink it, which is great.
You can just drink it, yeah.
That's right. So, I mean, we kind of talked about, how you started your channel and, Steven Erikson commenting on your video. I saw recently in a video put up that he left a very lengthy comment, and I thought it was it was an essay, really, let's be honest.
Yeah.
And in that, he was talking about some other works and talking about Rejoice, which is his sci-fi book.
Yeah.
And I really enjoy the fact that he pushes the Culture series so much by Banks, because this is something that when I met him in Orlando, he was he talked about it a bunch, talking about post-scarcity sci-fi.
Yeah.
Very fascinating. And I mean, that probably was a pretty amazing moment to see that kind of discourse going on in your comment section. Like, that's the best comment section of all time.
Yeah, that was like, I mean, so the thing is, I've been thinking about that a lot, and I made that video, and then I went to Wacken Open Air, and like, I come back from like some thrash metal concert at like 1 a.m. I open my phone, and it's like, Steven Erikson has commented, and he's like, I would like to actually explain this if that's fine with you, because I mean, that's how you do it when you are aware of your platform or whatever. He's like, are you okay with me commenting? And I'm like, hell yeah, go ahead. And then like I wake up again like a couple of hours later in my tent, and I have like these like 3 long ass comments with like him like looking at Star Trek and Culture and Rejoice and post scarcity, and I'm like, I can't actually reply to that on my phone in a tent at a festival. It's physically impossible to do.
You felt it also deserved a little more than that, probably, right? Some more attention.
Yeah.
That's so funny.
Yeah.
The wonders of YouTube, right?
What?
The wonders of YouTube.
The wonders of YouTube. And yeah, I mean, I'm glad he likes the Culture so much. It's like, I remember reading Rejoice for the first time when he came out, and I'm like, oh, hell yeah, someone's actually pushing Ian Banks. That's awesome. And then I was like, rereading it recently, and I was thinking more about it. For me, Rejoice, I still want to make a video on that. I started making one, and then I wasn't really happy with it. But I want to talk about like how Rejoice can be seen as a key to the Malazan Book of the Fallen in a lot of ways. And also the key of a very impatient Steven Erikson.
Yeah, because I mean, it's not really a spoiler to say this, but I believe that you felt Rejoice might have been Steven Erikson giving up that hope that he had for humans, right?
In a way. So my point, my thoughts are that he deals with the same topics, and he's been dealing with those all the time. It's like, the usual stuff. It's the post-scarcity thing. It's the never-ending cycle of violence that is, perpetuated by generations. Like, like how we deal with children is like his big theme has always been. And he tried to do all of that in the Malazan Book of the Fallen, and then he just thought that we would actually pick up on that as readers and maybe do something, and then no one got it. And he's like, okay, I'm going to go and write it in our world so people actually understand that I'm not just telling stories about green-skinned people with tusks.
Yeah. Yeah, Rejoice is one that I've been excited to get to just based on the premise. I actually love sci-fi just in general. And I wish I was reading a little more of it in my...
Have you read The Culture?
I am reading The Player of Games. It's my first Culture book because
so you skipped Consider Fleabus.
I did, and here's why. So people said it would be okay to do so, and they said if you need sold on it, you should do Player of Games, because Consider Fleabus is not like not everyone's favorite, right? But Player of the Games
Yeah.
is very highly regarded, and I know that Culture has
It's
a ton of.
fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, so far, so I'm about 100 pages into Player of Games, and I think it's excellent. The writing is so good, and it's funny. Like, it's really, really funny.
The conversations with the drones are so
Yes, and it's almost in a way like sometimes the drones feel more like humans than the humans do.
yeah. Yeah, there's that.
And there's times, to be honest with you, sometimes sci-fi comes across a little stiff. It comes across with a little less, that humanity piece whenever you have all the technology. But I don't think that this book so far has struggled from any of that.
I mean, it kind of depends on what kind of sci-fi authors you're reading. You have a lot of these, your classics, your Asimov, your Arthur C. Clarke most of the time, your Heinlein. They focus a lot on technology, but there's always been like very human-focused sci-fi out there. I mean, I know you're a huge fan of Ursula Le Guin, and she definitely brings she tells human stories that are just set in space somewhere. Or what's a guy called Walter M. Miller? I recently reread that one. I don't know if you've ever read A Canticle for Leibowitz, but if you haven't, you really should check that one out. It's insanely cool, and it's very human and funny.
I actually have not checked that out. I know that you're a big fan of Zelazny, and I am as well. And I thought Lord of Light was a great example of, I mean, really, honestly, like funny, maybe the biggest emotion I took out of that book. I just was laughing most of the time.
Yeah. I haven't read Lord of Light. I still want to read it. It's been on my radar forever, but there's no actual audiobook version of it, which kind of makes it hard for me to get it.
Yeah,
that's sort of like the issue.
Yeah, and I know there's audio here, but obviously it's a different market over there, so they don't release everything the same, and it's a big mess, right?
Because it's a region lock kind of thing, and unless I do something highly illegal, I will not get there.
So we actually have a question from 234 Pika Pika, and it says, "Would you recommend Rejoice for an Erikson novice?" And this question's directed at you, Raph, because I have not read Rejoice.
That's a very good question. First of all, hi. I recognize you from both my Patreon and my videos. Anyway, no, my point is, you can read it as a starter, and it does work as that. It's just like it's a sci-fi book, and it's a fairly like old school first contact story. So if something like Childhood's End by Arthur C. Clarke is something that you enjoy, then Rejoice might work. It does, it has all these like long ass philosophical discussions on scarcity and the ills of capitalism and all kinds of other things. And I mean, that's a genre you need to actually like if you want to, read that. I understand it's not everyone's cup of tea.
Right. Yeah. Especially coming from an epic fantasy, right?
But you can read it as a standalone with no prior knowledge of anything that Erikson has done.
Yeah. So I think we could probably say it would be a good first taste, but it might not also, like, he does other things, right? He's in a totally different vein whenever he's in Malazan. So
yeah,
don't give up on
with the same themes that he always wrestles with, but in a very different, genre or medium. And that's, I think, the important part there.
Yeah, absolutely. So Rejoice is one that I would really like to get to.
Have you tried his Star Trek parodies, the Willful Child novels?
No, I have not. I'm going to be honest, and this is, I might lose my nerd card here. Guys, I'm not a big Star Trek fan, and I haven't given it its due. Like, I haven't like sat down and been like, all right, let's see what this is all about. But like anytime I've tried to just like throw something on with it, I've just never really been into it. And I feel bad.
No, I mean, I think like Star Trek is something that you need to be in the right age bracket to actually start watching it, and then you'll stick with it. But yeah, I don't know, like later on it can be kind of tough to get into, especially if you start, I mean, as an experienced sci-fi reader and watcher, you can go and dissect Star Trek and take a lot out of it. But if you haven't read a lot of, watched a lot of sci-fi, and you're no longer 15, it can feel kind of dry, I guess.
that's kind of how I felt whenever I watched it. I knew, but you know what? I was younger when I did that. Like I haven't really given it a shot since I was probably early 20s. And I did watch the movies, like the new J.J. Abrams movies, which I know nobody really likes, or I don't think many people like the second and third one. I really liked the first one. I actually thought it was
the first one was really good. The first one did capture a lot of like the spirit of Star Trek.
I was intrigued. I mean, at the very least, I was like entertained throughout the whole movie, and I was like, "Hey, this feels like something big. Like this feels like really monumental." And that left a pretty good impression on me. And then I remember going back trying to watch some of the show, and I was just like, it's not for me right now. So maybe.
I mean, a big issue there is that if you're taking like the old original Star Trek or the Next Generation stuff. Television was made very differently in like the 60s and even like in the late 80s and early 90s from the way it is made now. And, it's a bit like when you're trying to go back and reading, 1930s pulp fantasy stories. The writing is so different that it can be hard to get into if you have never, tried that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think Dying Earth's a really good example of that by Jack Vance. Like, I was enjoying it a lot. I love his style, but there was a piece of it that I was like, we're jumping around so much. Like, I went with the wrong expectations is really what it is, right? Like, I was expecting it to be like a book one of a longer series and all these things. And then you get into Dying Earth, the first one, and it's like, boom, 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 boom. Ridiculous stuff's happening. The world building's amazing. I loved it.
Did you notice that like that first story, the magic system is exactly what Gygax and Arneson just lifted straight out for D&D?
Really?
Yeah. With the whole idea of like they have like spells on different levels, and once you have used the spell, you have to actually go and remember it for the next day.
Yeah, I felt that, but like to me, so again, I know it was written a long time ago, but my brain, I wasn't contextualizing it that way. So to me, it was just like, oh, here's like another fantasy series that's doing this. You know what I'm saying? When really that might have been the OG then. That might have been the first.
It is the OG. That's the one they took it from.
Well, Jack Vance is an author that I feel like we don't like hear a lot when we talk about fantasy in modern circles. But if you listen to authors talk, especially the bigger ones, I mean, George R. Martin's huge into Jack Vance. Like he loves Jack Vance. Gaiman loves Jack
Gaiman
Vance.
is hugely into Jack Vance. Like,
I've become a really big fan of like looking at who inspired my favorite authors, which I love George's work, and I know some people do, some people don't, or whatever. But his influences, when I read them, like Tad Williams, Lasney, Jack Vance, Faulkner, when you read them, they feel like you could see the lineage. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I would say so. Yes. Especially the Tad Williams one, definitely.
Mm-hmm.
The Zelazny, I think you see more when you read George R. Martin stuff that is non-Song of Ice and Fire.
Yes, I'd agree with that. Yeah.
How much of like his non-Song of Ice and Fire stuff have you read by George?
So I started Windhaven a long time ago and never ended up finishing. That's with Lisa Tuttle. That was the joint.
Yeah, I started that one too and never finished it.
Yeah, it wasn't that I disliked it, but it was whenever I wasn't really reading. So I was constantly starting a book and never finishing it. And then I read Ice Dragon, which is his kid's novel, and then I read Fever Dream, which I love.
Fever Dream is great.
I think it's the best vampire book I've ever read. Some people
haven't read that many vampire books, but that one is really cool.
I accidentally have read a lot of vampire books. It's like, and people say, "Oh, you like vampire?" I'm like, not really. Like, they're really not my thing. But I keep reading about vampires somehow. It just keeps happening.
I've read Dracula, of course, and I read this one. There's one by Fritz Lieber that I really want to read, but I haven't gotten around to yet. I keep forgetting what it's called, and it's a very techy, like, I mean, it's written in the 60s, but still, it's a very tech vampire thing. So it's a vampire that kind of occupies, or in a way, these like huge billboard first like digital or like electronic billboards, and it kind of draws out your soul through that, and that's how that vampire kind of lives. And I really want to read that one.
Stephen King talked about that, I believe, in his foreword for Salem's Lot. He actually talked about that book, and he was talking about how like new technology take on Dracula and these things. He's like, I love that. He's like, but I want to think about like middle America. Let's see what vampires could do to a town, right? And so
I mean,
go ahead.
You go ahead.
No, you're good.
I mean, the point is, with Stephen King, I'm not a huge Stephen King fan. There's a lot of reasons for that, I guess. But I feel that Stephen King has read a lot of Fritz Lieber in his time.
Mm-hmm.
There's a book not by Stephen King, but by Fritz Lieber, where I always say that's the novel that Stephen King is trying to write. It's Our Lady of Darkness. It's fantastic. It's short, from like the 70s, and it's about an author who is recovering from alcoholism and is sort of confronting supernatural things happening in his city, and it just screams Stephen King to me.
Yeah, I mean, I think King is definitely one of those people who wears his influences on his sleeve, so it's usually pretty easy to pick out. I mean, in The Dark Tower, he just straight up like mentions people. Like it's crazy how on the nose it is, which I actually like. I'm a big Stephen King fan. I know there's plenty of ways to criticize his work, and not everyone enjoys him, but he's like one for me. Like when I read it, it's like cozy in a messed up way.
I think that's sort of like the problem for me with Stephen King's. Like I do really like The Gunslinger. It's a fantastic novel, and it's astonishingly angry for Stephen King. Like the flashbacks into New York that you have there. Holy shit, is he angry about social issues at that time?
Yeah.
But like newest Stephen King that I've read, it's very nostalgic in a lot of ways. It's just like, oh, wasn't 1950s America great? And I'm like, I'm not an American. I don't have that nostalgia.
Yes, and you know what, you are right in that regard. And I've had this talk with plenty of people. Like it's a very like American thing. Like it's very he can lose an audience because of how American inspired he is, I guess. And even some of like the Easter eggs and stuff that's thrown in, they're very contextualized to the American experience. So I'm not surprised. I'm actually a little bit shocked whenever I meet someone from Europe or another part of the world that likes Stephen King like a ton. I'm like, oh, that's interesting. I have found that with those people, a lot of them are very into American pop culture from back in the day. Like it just happens to be a coinciding thing. So
I think like Stephen King, from my experience, I always differentiate between when it comes to writers, I differentiate between, authors and storytellers. And for me, Stephen King is a storyteller. He has great ideas for stories. I can listen to Stephen King tell me a horror story. I'm fine with that. I just don't really like his style. I find it kind of bland in a lot of ways, and then he does all that nostalgia stuff that I can't deal with, and then that's why I love The Gunslinger. I think The Gunslinger is the one time where Stephen King actually tried to do something interesting with his words.
Yeah, I mean, he when he wrote The Gunslinger, he was 17, and he said he had just come out of a writing workshop. So he calls it his most pretentious book.
I like pretentious.
Yeah, you know what though? That's what I've said. So when I first read The Gunslinger, I wasn't a big fan. The first time I read it back in like 2015 or something. So I reread it last year, and I was like, I love this book. Like I was like, this is awesome. And then you read, and he's like, yeah, take it or leave it. Like it was me trying my best. Like that's kind of what it came down to. I'm not surprised. It kind of actually just shows how in tune you are with reading, because King says story comes before everything. He says it comes before writing for him, before the characters, before anything. He's like, it's all about the story. So that makes sense that's what you pick up on. You say, well, damn, he's a really good storyteller. And I think I asked AP last time on the last episode, I said, do you know any, not the best writers, but really great storytellers? Yeah. And I think I still think that King has a lot of merits as a writer as well. So I'm not trying to shit on the guy, but I'm just saying like he's definitely a great storyteller in my opinion.
I think that's sort of the thing is like you take something like The Gunslinger and then you compare it to something like say Blood Meridian, and which is, another like super bleak sort of Western story. And with someone like McCarthy, you can see that McCarthy places every word there for a reason. There's no spare words in like his prose, in his style. There's no spare words there. And King not just cares about the story, but there's a lot of words you can cut out in King's stories and still get the story across. And I think that's sort of the difference where I say he doesn't care too much about the words. I mean, obviously he does. He's a competent writer, don't get me wrong, but
we're not saying he's
not as meticulous about every single word in his text.
Yeah. Do you think that is a byproduct of being prolific?
Could be. I don't know. I mean, I don't know his work process. I think he's got a head full of stories and he just wants to get them out. Because at this point, why would he write if he doesn't want to tell stories, right?
Yeah, he clearly loves what he does.
It's not for money.
No. I believe he loves what he does, but maybe he gets bored, throws it in the drawer, starts the next.
I think he might be someone who writes down his story, and then I can sympathize with that. He might just not want to actually go through, like, I don't know, 20 revisions to get the thing just right, because like I've told the story, now I want to go and move on and tell the next story. That's something that I can see with someone like King happening.
Actually, I can relate to that in my
don't get me wrong, me too.
When I feel not conquer, but when I feel like I've understood and kind of, we'll use the word conquer, fuck it. So when I feel like I've conquered something, it's really hard for me to go back to it. And it doesn't mean that when I say conquer, it doesn't mean it's perfect. But it's just like I've done it. I know there's more work to be done, but I'd like to move on. The only place that I don't do that is actually in my job, because I actually love revisions and editing code. But like with writing, when I write, it's very hard for me to edit. I hate the editing process.
I get that. It's like when I was writing academic stuff for like university and shit, I was like, I hate reading my own text. It's like I'm sitting in front of an empty page and I like think and think and think. It takes me like weeks to actually start typing. When I type, it's exactly what I want there, and I will not go back and rewrite that shit.
I think,
and it takes me like a physical effort to actually go and just go through that for typos.
I think
luckily I don't make that many typos, but it's
well, I do. I have terrible grammar. So me, it's not so much that I'm against changing my words. I actually just get nauseated by how bad my writing is, and then it's like you're almost having to like tear yourself down, which is how you get better, really. But it's not as fun. It's not as simple as that. It's just not as fun to me. And I think editing is like an amazing thing. Like the talent I see AP have whenever he goes and edits something, I'm just like, that is so valuable, and it's everything to a polished product. But as someone who's like writing just for fun, it is a little bit harder for me to reopen that Word doc from about 9 months ago.
I think there's a bit like when you're reading your own text, it's similar to hearing your own voice on a recording. There's always that like.
That's why I don't watch my videos.
Yeah, me neither. It's like it's the hardest part of editing is hearing my own voice.
I hate it, dude. AP, thank you. AP said, Jimmy, your writing is not bad, and I will take that as a compliment, because I know you would tell me if it was utter shit. So thank you. AP is one of the best in the business. He's the man.
Yeah.
We did have a question.
That's like the other thing that I wanted to get at is like there's some authors that just like sit there and toy with like one word again and again until they feel it's perfect. And that's a different approach to writing than just telling a story. It's like I recently went and read that terrible novel, Finnegan's Wake, if you want to call it a novel. And it took James Joyce 17 years to write that thing. And you can tell that he was like playing around with syllables. Like, how can I take this word and change one syllable? How does it sound then? Does it make sense? Does it still make sense? I'm gonna change it some more. How can I?
Maybe.
And I get that like joy of playing just with sounds and stuff, but I can't do it with my own words. I can't do it with my own writing.
Yeah, maybe it's a little bit of over engineering even at some point, But I totally get it. Now, to be fair, I think McCarthy's like one of the best authors ever. Like he's like world class to me. Like I love his stuff. I haven't read Blood Meridian though. That's the next one I have on my list for him. But I mean, I think The Road and No Country for Old Men are just like.
I love both The Road and No Country for Old Men. My favorite, like of the three that I've read, now you know the other two, is Blood Meridian. It kind of speaks to me in a way that is difficult to explain. I read that for the first time, like, holy shit, this is the darkest thing I've ever read. This is the bleakest thing I've ever read. And I know you'll now go and say, now, Child of God is much worse.
It's rough. It's rough.
I haven't read that one yet. I will, however, but like Blood Meridian does a lot of things in fascinating ways, and I just love it.
Yeah. So what I will say about Child of God is that it's very hard to relate to. And I think that's probably why a lot of people bounce off of it. I mean, it's a character study. Like, I'm not even sure if it's a story. Like, it is just the character study of like the worst person ever and doing horrendous things. It's well written, I think. But yeah,
Mhm.
Child of God, I'll never read that again. I'm good.
I think like that's like an interesting thing that when you look at like great authors, great authors, to me, great authors, okay, a lot of them have like one or two like topics or themes they wrestle with all their life. And for McCarthy, that's like the human condition or the human nature in extreme circumstances, in extreme scenes, or yeah, in extreme circumstances, the edges of humanity. That's what he does. You look at the road, you have, the father and the kid in, that post-apocalyptic setting, and that's a very extreme circumstance. And then you go to
Yeah.
something by like No Country for Old Men, and it's a much, more relatable personal situation because of the setting. But it's still what happens when like normal people are thrown into the actual extremes, and does their humanity break down or does it not? And I think that's sort of the thing that interests McCarthy a lot.
Yeah, and that interests me. That's why I love post-apocalyptic works. I mean, sometimes I don't, but like I do tend to kind of vibe with post-apocalyptic settings and premises way more than anything else.
Yeah. Let me repeat my recommendation for Canticle for Leibowitz, because it's post-apocalyptic.
Yeah, Omar in the chat, actually, as soon as you said that, he was like, "Oh, it's post-apocalyptic. Jimmy would love it." So we
Yeah,
did
it is.
we did have a question from Esme, and I wanted to highlight this because Esme has been watching the channel for a long time, but she's never been able to do one of these live. So this
Oh,
time
cool.
zone difference actually worked out for her. And she said, "Raph, I know you're big into rock music. I was wondering what your opinion and the general consensus in Germany is on Rammstein. I'm Dutch and I love their music so much." It's a
All
loaded
right, so
question.
here's the thing. They are huge. They are huge in Germany. They're absolutely huge in Germany. I hate them. and there's a bunch of reasons for that, and they become kind of political.
I
So
see.
Rammstein is very, very deliberately playing with provocations as a medium to, create buzz around the stuff they do. And they're deliberately playing with like a fascist aesthetic. And no, I will never call them fascists. They're not. They're deliberately doing that in a non-political way, and that's something that pisses me off no end.
Hmm.
That kind of stuff you just don't try to depoliticize.
Yeah,
If that makes sense.
I know nothing about Ramstein other than Du Hast, which everyone knows, I think.
Yeah.
It was at every sporting event I was ever at, and I was just
Yeah.
like, the concerts look kind of
I
neat.
mean, that's why it works, because they're adopting like a fascist aesthetic, and a fascist aesthetic is extremely powerful when it comes to stuff like sporting events or whatever. It's that like very straight marching rhythm, the very simple riff, the very charismatic voice with like the rolled R's and everything. And it works well to, drive people into, invading Poland, or, cheering for someone at a sporting event. It works.
Yeah, and it's easy to get everyone under that banner very fast and on the
Yeah,
same
exactly.
pace. Yeah, I understand that. I mean, you see that. I'm really into hip hop, and that's the same thing with hip hop, right? Like
Yeah.
everyone's just bobbing their heads.
Yeah, recently was on a conversation about like anti-Semitic tendencies in some parts of heavy metal, and it kind of devolved into like a discussion of sexism in heavy metal, and someone was like talking about like how that is also a problem in hip hop, and I'm like, yeah, but those are both like genres are very extrovert genres that channel a lot of aggression. That's why you go to those kind of music, is to let off steam, and
Yeah.
in a way celebrate that level of aggression and stress relief in that regard. It's an extrovert kind of music. When you go to grunge, for example, all the aggression is like, pointed inside. It's all about like, hating yourself and stuff like that.
Yeah, I actually was talking to my wife because, and you'll notice that's the only person I talk to. But I was talking to her and I was said, I don't really listen to music anymore because it influences my mood too much. Like I think it's the most it's like one of the most powerful things in the world. Just the kind of the mood it can put you into, and it's one of the reasons why I actually really enjoy when I can't always do it, but I will listen to music while I read sometimes, and
Yeah.
it really influences my reading. Like it can really elevate things for me.
Yeah, yeah. It's one of the situations where I like openly cry is at concerts. I've cried at like Sabotage concerts, and I've cried at like Primordial concerts. It's like where you like, it's cathartic in a way.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's where I can
Definitely.
overcome my toxic masculinity by being even more toxic and even more masculine, and no one cares.
That's awesome. We have a question for you. Who is your favorite band?
My favorite band. That's hard. That's hard to answer. On a personal human level, I would say Manila Road.
I do not know who that is, but I will listen to them after this. I used to be really into metal, and by really in, not as into as you, but like I liked it is what I mean when I say that.
Yeah, I mean, so the thing with Manila Road is though that there's a very like personal connection. I've organized a show for them before Mark Shelton passed away 3 years ago. In 2018, he passed away. Anyway, at a concert, like on the way back from the concert, he died. It's like the closest to the rock and roll death you can get.
Wow.
It's like play the show and die on the way back to the hotel.
Damn, that's tragic.
And that was rough. And it's like I've met them a couple of times, and not like we were close friends or anything, but it's like still like someone that had a huge influence on who I've become over the years. So there's like a personal connection there. When we're just like talking music, I don't know, possibly Iron Maiden or Jethro Tull.
Nice. Nick says Manila Road are legends, very underrated. So you got some fans in the chat here. AP has a wonderful question, and I was trying to tee this one up, so he's reading my mind. He says, "Can you ask Raph if he thinks if Grimdark is the fantasy equivalent of metal, in that a lot of it channels that rage and anger?" And I'm very curious about this because I've seen your takes on Grimdark and also like of the anti-hero and a lot of these things that we see thrown around in modern fantasy that honestly are just terms for marketing mostly, but
I would say no, it's not the equivalent to heavy metal. It may be. It might be the equivalent to like a subgenre of heavy metal, in that it takes things from it orientates itself within, locates itself within a genre, right? Grimdark is like, we're fantasy, we're just not like other fantasy. So it's more like it's more like the not like other girls thing of fantasy. No, it's more the
oh man.
No, it's more like your young new metal, your metalcore or extreme metal of heavy metal. Was like, we're not like those people that with their like long hair and spandex pants. Now we're all evil and stuff.
God, that's terrific.
Grimdark is the mayhem of fantasy. Does that make sense?
Someone said Grimdark is screamo, Sword and Sorcery is metal. That's pretty good. I do think that that's actually a pretty good question though by AP, because I will say this, while I'm not sure where I stand on that answer, like what I can definitely say is I do think some people end up labeled Grimdark because of their anger in their work. Like I feel like we both read The Steel Remains by Richard K. Morgan. It's
that is not Grimdark, but it gets labeled Grimdark.
It's a very angry book. A very, very angry book. And
I think that's exactly the difference, because Grimdark is not necessarily angry. Grimdark plays with those things. And I mean, as I said, you've watched the video that I made on it. It's like, I think Grimdark was always like a weird misnomer. It's something that people took on in anger, but it was leveled as like an accusation against people like Joe Abercrombie at the time.
Yeah, and it kind of turned it
2011, that kind of time.
Yeah, and then they turned it into a term of endearment almost.
Yeah, right? Exactly. That's what it's sort of like the sulky like teenagers. And that sulky teenagers like, you call me Grimdark, I'm gonna wear it with pride.
I guess I can't really blame them though, right? Like,
no, I can't blame them. I just think like with all of these kind of things, it kind of started out with like things, like necessary things to say, like valid things to say, and then at some point the form took over and the message behind it kind of got lost. It's like all about the form. And you read something like, I don't know, Prince of Thorns, which I really hate.
I was wondering.
I read the entirety. Like Mark Lawrence is a fantastic author. He knows how to use them words, but there's stuff in there that really annoys me on a lot of levels where I'm like, yeah, you're just playing with the form and the kind of things that happen in what is labeled Grimdark, because they are rather, dark, extreme themes. I would say they deserve a level of sincerity that you can't get with like, but I'm just playing with it. It's like, yeah, but you're very explicitly making jokes about sexual assault. I'm not happy with that, my friend.
Yeah, and to what end, right?
Yeah.
Because there's always a argument for critiquing these things. So like, I
Oh,
don't
yeah.
necessarily think that you can't or should. You can do whatever you want, right? But I
Exactly.
do think that the stuff that kind of bubbles up to the top, in my opinion, at least when we're talking about some of the darker fantasy that we read, is the ones that take it, with care. And it's one thing I really like about Joe Abercrombie,
Yeah.
because it seems like Grimdark kind of already means that there's going to be sexual violence. Like, it feels like that's like a stigma on it, but Joe Abercrombie doesn't do that, which is fascinating.
No. I mean, there's that one scene near the end of Last Argument of Kings that he then got called out for, and then and that's the thing that I highly respect about Joe Abercrombie is he's willing to understand like when he went too far or got something wrong, and then he changes those kind of things. And he's like, yeah, the scene with the queen at the end of Last Argument of Kings, making her the should I spoil that, or can we accept that at this point?
We won't, just because I know there's.
But you know what I mean, right?
Yes, there is a situation that is
he got called out for that as it being, a lot of things, including homophobic and whatnot. He's like, yeah, you're right. I should have set that up in a different way, and I understand it, and that's something that I highly respect about Joe Abercrombie. I still have a bone to pick with him, where I think subconsciously or not deliberately, but he built into the world building of the first trilogy and the standalones. I haven't read the second trilogy yet. He built something into the world that is at least structurally anti-Semitic.
Right. I remember you talking about kind of the rhetoric of like a hidden power, the people are controlling.
Yeah, it's like you have the banks, especially Valentinborg. Yeah, right. You have them controlling and pulling the strings behind the scenes, and then you're like, but it's not just financial power, which is a legitimate like criticism of our world as well. It's like, yeah, financial interests in international corporations are pulling a lot of strings. But then you're like building in another level behind that. It's like, oh, there's that guy with magical power who actually controls the banks. And I'm like, that's
okay. Yeah. So
don't do that.
I definitely see what you're saying. I'd put my neck out there to probably say that is certainly not the intent.
No, it's not intentional.
Yeah, I don't think it's intentional. He seems like a rather thoughtful guy that has.
No, I think it's one of those like he didn't do that on purpose. It's just because it's so deeply ingrained in how we in like the Western world think.
Yeah,
it's been in like our propaganda and the things we've been told forever and ever. It's been in there for like ever since like, I don't know, the 10th century, when we started killing Jews for poisoning wells, which they didn't do, and stuff like that. It's been in there so much. It's when we don't like actually pay attention, it's very easy to just like drop that in as a shorthand for something.
Yeah, right. It's a false piece of propaganda that has been passed down, and it's subconsciously baked into almost like tropes in our head whenever it's actually been very, very harmful in the past. So I totally understand what you're saying. I was actually going to, because I've seen you talk about this a couple times in Iskar's Discord. So I was actually going to ask you about that and be like, certainly you didn't think that it was intentional.
No.
I totally see what you're saying though. That makes sense. Also,
that's like, I think one of the things that I'm always struggling with is like, I've been doing a lot of criticizing of stuff recently, and that's stuff that I, at least partly, we're not talking, Wheel of Time. There's a lot of stuff that I really love, but I see the problems, and I think we need to be aware of the issues so we can avoid them going forward.
Yeah.
And a lot of these people don't do that on purpose. Obviously, there's H.P. Lovecraft, and he does shit on purpose. But most of the people don't do that. They're just like subconsciously just propagating those myths and those like harmful stereotypes. And we should point to that and go like, don't do that in the future.
Yeah. AP has a comment here. I think it kind of goes well with this. It says, this structural anti-Semitism is frequently unconsciously replicated when authors create Eurocentric based secondary worlds. It doesn't make it any more palatable, but it is generally not intentional, which I think is exactly what you were saying.
Yeah, that's the point. It's not intentional. It's just in there.
Yeah. I'll be honest. When I read it, I just was like, "This is awesome." You know, I'll just be honest.
I felt the same when I read the first,
Mhm.
and then I got kind of bored by the second one. And when we came to like the battle in the high places, I was like, "Why are you taking 10 times the page count of Helm's Deep to just write Helm's Deep?"
But it's better in Helm's Deep.
I don't think so.
No,
It gets very repetitive at some point.
I'm just
And then I reread it recently, and I'm like, yeah, mostly, I finally understand what he's doing.
Mm-hmm.
He is deliberately, you know, going to play with Lord of the Rings. I think that the first trilogy is an answer or an argument or a subversion of Lord of the Rings in a lot of ways, and I can live with that. It's the, you know, what if Gandalf actually was evil?
Yeah, and that is a cool premise. That's a very
it is a cool premise, and he does do a lot of that, and I'm happy with that. And under that lens, I can even live with that battle in the high places. I just still think it's like a couple of pages too long.
Well, that's fair. I mean, execution and premise are totally separate, right? Like one can be amazing.
Yeah, and he got such that's like the other thing with Joe Abercrombie. Is like that's his debut novel, and he improved over time a lot. And once you reach something like The Heroes, he's become so much more skilled at what he does.
I think you're really gonna like the trilogy.
It's already in my Audible library. I just haven't had time to actually go and commit to it.
Yeah, I think you'll really like it. I mean, I'll also just be curious to hear your criticisms, because I think that, you know, you read on a much deeper level than I do. But I think just in general, from like the craft perspective, the way he's able to get things done in like 400 pages is so I'm so appreciative of it.
I think like Abercrombie and George R. Martin are like the two authors where I'm like, you can see that those two come from television.
Yeah,
because both work in television. When you look at like how George R. Martin is structuring Game of Thrones and the next books, it's very much 80s, 90s television with like every chapter ends on a cliffhanger and so forth. It's very like on that model of how television was done when George R. Martin worked in Hollywood.
Yep.
And then you move forward to Joe Abercrombie. And Abercrombie is basically writing like Joss Whedon was directing his shows in like the late 90s and early 2000s. With like the snappy dialogue, the quick cuts, the slightly ironic detachment from everything. That's very much like late 90s, early 2000s television, which is where Abercrombie comes from. And that's why it's so highly successful and so highly accessible, because it used the same imagery, the same language that we're already you know, familiar with from television, from, you know, consuming over there. It's like, I watched Knight Rider and all that other stuff. Of course I'm gonna like the way George R. Martin tells me a story. I watch Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I'll be happy with the way Joe Abercrombie writes dialogue.
I love Buffy. Oh man. I've been thinking about doing a rewatch.
When you compare the two, you can't deny that it does use a similar language when it comes to like how he directs scenes, how he writes dialogue. It is that like late 90s, early 2000s snappy dialogue that is always slightly too self-aware.
Yeah.
Know what I mean?
Yeah, no, definitely. And so I vibe with that a lot. So it's not shocking that those are like two of my favorite authors, right? And yeah. I really need to rewatch Buffy, because I think back on watching that show so fondly. Like what? Oh God, I love it. I'm glad you kind of brought up the idea of Abercrombie messing with Lord of the Rings, because there's even spots in that trilogy where he completely like subverts the Fellowship, and I'm just like, I loved it so much. And I know that here, actually, I'll just ask you, this is a good question. So do you feel like there's value in deconstructing things like that? Because I have seen a lot of people have the opinion that if you are only deconstructing past works, that your work can never stand up on its own. I would say that that's a complete farce, personally. I don't think that's true at all, but I'd like to hear your take.
Okay, so I personally do love deconstruction a lot. It's something that I'm very happy with. It's something that I do in my mind. It's something I appreciate a lot. I can see the ideas, like if you're only deconstructing, you're not adding anything to the conversation. You're not actually creative. You're just like destructive. I don't think that's necessarily the case, because a good deconstruction does actually make its own point and does actually add something to the conversation and moves the conversation forward. It's not just like, hey, let me invert every trope and see what happens.
Yeah, this happens a lot. This gets leveled out to George with Lord of the Rings quite a bit, because he is playing with Lord of the Rings. And in fact, I think people kind of lose sight of that whenever they're talking about, I'm really into theories and stuff. I'm like neck deep into that community and have been for many years. But when I watch these people like create their theories, I'm like, you're kind of missing the point, like, of what this is, like what this started as. Now, I would say it's more of a conversation in a lot of ways. And there's also a lot of stuff that he straight up just loves about Tolkien, and you can see it because he uses in his work.
I mean, I think that's one of the things that people sometimes misunderstand or ignores. Like, literature is always an ongoing conversation, right? There's like authors are always in conversation with other authors, whether that's, the big ones of their own genre, or, people from other genres, or even nonfiction authors. Authors react to the stuff that they have read and build that into like a new argument that they are making, but using all those things from before. And that's what Abercrombie does. And he basically takes Lord of the Rings, and then he looks at like, where does Tolkien come from, which is like late Victorian, early 20th century England. And then you look at the Union, which is like the most brutal deconstruction or harsh criticism, so to speak, of like late imperial England. When you look at how the Union, the beginning of like Blade itself, when you have the Jezzel Den Luther stuff, when they're all sitting there in their officers' cafe, getting drunk, behaving like absolute arseholes. That's how noble officers in like late 19th, early 20th century England behave, because they're all sort of landed nobility and they have way too much money to spend. And I don't know if you've ever read like one of the Flashman novels by George MacDonald Fraser. That's exactly how those fuckers behave, right?
I have not.
It's an interesting thing. It's another one that George R. R. Martin is always praising.
Well, I'll read it.
And it's historical novels. It's sort of what what's his name? Bernard Cornwell's Sharp series is kind of a comment on. It's about that guy George Flashman, whatever his first name is, Flashman. He's a British officer in like somewhere in the 19th century, and he behaves like the cliche privileged white male behaves, which is like fucking around and being a dick to anyone who can be a dick to. And it works sort of. It's like a first person narrative. It works because you hate the guy. But there's a level of irony there that makes it kind of bearable. And you read something like The Union, that's exactly that like milieu that Abercrombie is criticizing. And that's the milieu that Tolkien came from when he went to war in like the First World War. That's exactly the milieu that some stuff in, say, the Shire comes from. When you look at, that whole scene in Crick Hollow in the beginning of Lord of the Rings, right? They come there after the whole scare at Maggot's farm. They cross the bridge. They go there. What do those fuckers do? They start bathing, and then they just like spill all the bathwater, then walk over. It's like, oh, Sam's gonna take care of that. That's so fucking. What fucking dickheads, right? Sorry, I'm getting worked up, and there's a classist element in Lord of the Rings that often gets overlooked. It's like Frodo, Pippin, and Merry are privileged, like nobody's business. They're like absolutely privileged, and Sam is the poor sod who has to actually deal with the consequences.
And the real hero.
Yeah, and that's like the dark side of it, is because the ideal is that the British officer's Batman, which is a wonderful word, the Batman has to do all of that, and he's still going to be loyal. And then we just like praise that loyalty of the person who knows their station. They are, they know they'll never reach the level of their master. It's slavery without slavery, but it's just built in there. It's romanticized to high heaven by Tolkien, because that's like the background he comes from.
Yeah. And he uses all that real world experience to build that out.
Yeah. And that's something that like Abercrombie criticized when he builds the Union exactly like that, and has those conversations with like the poor one who's still trying to wager with everyone else because he has to be part of the boys and stuff like that. And you have like that's the conflict of someone like Colonel West in that whole situation, is because he doesn't come from that like landed aristocracy, but he's there for merit, and he still has to try to be compete with them on that social level.
Yeah, and that kind of inspiration behind characters and like their purpose with not just the narrative but the world, I think that kind of gets lost when we talk about like excellent character work, because everyone always says, "Oh, Joe Abercrombie's characters are just great," and it's like a thing we say, but people don't really dive into why that is. I mean, sure, they're compelling. I mean, in my opinion, they're compelling. Some people might not find it that way, but I think it's also like the roles in the world that he's built. It's very consistent.
I think that's like the others. I recently said that I get pissed off by the word character work, and that was like that's like one of those like sorry, I'm getting confused. Anyway, no, there's a slight echo like on the audio, and I always hear myself talking after a second. That kind of really makes me go insane. Anyway,
fair.
no worries. Point is, the word character work, or the different, we use the word character work, and no one has ever defined what that means. Does that mean it's a character you like? Does it mean it's a rounded character? Does it mean that the way the character is written gives you an insight into the character? We don't know. Joe Abercrombie's characters are compelling. That's a good word. It's like you read those people, and if they're not Pharaoh Melgen, who kind of gets like really short shrift in that first trilogy, you can connect to them or try to understand them and go deeper, and that's really cool. And he does that like with like a very spare kind of prose that works really well. Spare style, I have to say, now that AP is actually listening.
Yes, a style. That's very important. Yeah, I like the Sperry style. I've realized. I think I've always related
you
him
like
a little
McCarthy.
Yeah, I like a lot of things. I think that's my problem. I like, for instance, I know you weren't the biggest fan of Kings of the Wild, and like all your criticisms that like whenever you commented, I'm like, those are all valid. But I still liked it. Like I just can't help it. I don't know. I just had fun. You know what I mean?
I didn't hate it. I had fun. I had fun like finding all the like the pop, like all the rock music references. That was fun. I just felt like there were like a couple of choices in there, like in the word, where I'm like, I don't know, dude.
Well, certainly the rot. I know you put out the rot, and I would agree. I thought it was just kind of lazy.
The rot is kind of okay, but making the one gay character be the one with the rot just like brings back that whole HIV scare thing from the 80s. And I'm like, dude, don't do that.
I looked at it as the intent was probably to maybe like, I don't know. That's a tough one. I'm not even going to really attempt to break it down. The only thing is I do not feel like he's an author that did that maliciously. Even if,
of course
you know what
not.
I mean? The thing I thought was interesting about him is that I thought him having a lot of inspiration from Guy Gavriel Kay was really fascinating, just because he's writing such a different style. And I know it's not a 1-for-1 or anything, but you do see, at least in my opinion, in the way that he styles his story, it makes a lot of sense with the words that he uses. And I know like little word choices like that are like, maybe it's not the hardest thing, but to do it consistently over 400 to 500 pages, I think is pretty impressive, because even when I write a story, I'm like, wait, am I losing like what the feel? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's a difficult thing to do.
No, I agree with you. I just personally found some of the humor a bit too just, oh, I said tits, let's laugh. And I'm like,
yeah, I
don't know.
There's some low hanging fruit there.
I am no longer 13, and I can't be bothered to just get drunk to read your book.
Yeah, there was some low hanging fruit in there I didn't enjoy. The pieces of humor, and they always get me, and it probably speaks to how stupid I am.
Yeah, but for like a debut novel, it was really cool. There were just like a couple of like one or two like choices in there where I'm like, if this was like a self-published novel, I would say, yeah, whatever. But this was like published by, I tried to find out if it was self-published first, but it felt like if like an actual publisher goes through that, someone should have like, double check and go like, hey, maybe kill that one inconsistency.
Yeah, it makes you
Maybe just
wonder.
drop that one word or whatever.
Yeah, it makes you wonder, like what happens in that editing process. Like I'm not in tune with the publishing industry, so I'm not
No, I
sure.
mean, obviously AP is only in the comments, but my
Right.
sad theory is that like how publishing houses work is they buy up a lot of, promising authors, they push them out with like as little investment as possible, basically throw them against the wall and hope that something sticks. And if it sticks, it gets like better production values next time round.
It
Because
sounds
that's
like
how
streaming. It sounds the exact
that's
same
that's
thing.
that's how a lot of like the music industry works these days. You publish everything and you basically hope that something sticks and then you invest in that later. And I feel that publishing houses work with new authors the same ways. Like there's not much investment there. You take the thing, you go like once through it, you just like throw it out and hope it blows up, and then you actually pay attention.
Yeah, and it's probably because like with production costs
Yeah.
over time going down, it's like we don't have to make this really
Mhm.
restricted thing. It would actually be easier just to produce it all and then to see what
Yeah.
happens, right? And then cut your ties. That definitely happens with Netflix does this all the time. I mean, you'll see a show that's half-assed and it's basically a whole pilot season. They
Yeah.
throw it, and if it gets a fandom, they're like, we're in, we'll do 2, and then we'll cancel it
Yeah.
because we're assholes. Um, Nick said, I like stupid 13-year-old humor still. And the one thing about Kings of the Wild that I laugh so hard at is the guy's like, oh, I would explain it, but it takes way too long to explain. And the guy's like, not really. And then he explains it in like 2 sentences. He's like, yeah, it's just like way too much to explain. And I don't know why, but like that, dude,
Yeah, that was funny.
it killed me, dude. I don't know what it was. Like my friend, he doesn't read too much, but I sent him that paragraph in the book, and I was like, "This is just like so what we used to laugh at." And so
Yeah.
that those pieces of the humor I did find very funny.
No, there's a lot of funny stuff in there, and I will read
Bloody
Bloody
Rose,
Red Rose or just Red Rose or whatever it's called,
yeah.
Bloody Rose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Mm.
I look forward to seeing how he can grow, and I'd also like to see him maybe take on something even a little bit more serious. But
Mhm.
he did do a good job of balancing like emotional stuff with the
Yeah.
with the humor. So
I think he got we're like old now and we have all this like buried like drama that we've never actually talked about kind of thing. He got that really well, and it's like I was happy with that. It's like when you have like old friends, you have this old back, friendship that
yeah,
goes back like decades at this point. And there's that stuff that you never talked about because you were like 15. And when you're 15, you're not good at talking about drama or emotions or stuff like that. Because when you're 15 and male, you don't have emotions. And it kind of weighs on your mind. And then at some point when you're like 27 or 30 or whatever, you sit down and at some point it all comes out and you deal with that. And I think he got that right.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I highlighted that a little bit in my review is like
Mhm.
he didn't just ride on the fact that they had been old friends and they're catching up and they have a couple inside jokes. It was like, well, why did they stop being friends in a way? Like
Yeah.
that's a really, the drift away usually
Mhm.
has a catalyst, whether it's something that's very simple, like whether it's just space or people moving or whatever. But other
Yeah.
times it's something a little bit more deep. And I did think that he captured that really well. And I wish I would see more of that. I think that's like one thing that I loved about Malazan too. And like First Law is that
Writing old characters is something that too
yeah,
few people try.
I agree. I agree. R. Scott Baker does a phenomenal job of this. He actually ends up writing some children in the sequel series that are they're disturbing. But in
I still have to read that R. Scott Baker because it's one of those region lock things. I can get the first trilogy in audio,
Mhm.
and I can get book 4 of Aspect Emperor.
Yeah, that would be very confusing.
And I'm like, I want to get all of that because I'm slightly neurotic about those kind of things. And it's like everyone tells me I should read that. It's like I I mean I studied philosophy at university. I was focusing on philosophy of religion. This will be right up my alley.
Yeah, you would have a lot
I,
to say.
I might disagree with him a lot, but I want to read that. I'm just like it's a project.
We gotta ship you. I'll ship you over books on tape. That's what we'll do. I'll ship it to you, man. Because I honestly would love to hear you discuss it because it is very deep, very dense, and there's a lot being said in the
Mhm.
subcontext that like
Yeah.
it's wild. it's a wild book. I think he's I think
Yeah.
he's just terrific. So
I do believe that I will really enjoy reading that. And as I said, I might disagree. I'm pretty sure I disagree because from what I've heard, he's like very much into like the oh God.
deterministic.
Hmm?
Deterministic.
Yeah, he's like there's that word that Niflrock always uses that I can't actually pronounce. The eliminate whatever, the Daniel Dennett school of like philosophy of mind, basically.
Yeah, so he definitely does not believe in agency. He believes that you are like
Yeah.
biologically set down a path and that there's nothing you can do about it, which is a fascinating way to write your story. I mean, that's what I will say. I always
Yeah.
tell people it's like if there was someone who could manipulate that, that's kind of what this becomes. And
Yeah.
it's not for it's not for the weak of heart. I would say it's pretty
Mhm.
rough, but I happen to love it a lot. I'm actually doing a conversation tomorrow with Slowly Read and Shelf Unstable at 2 p.m. for the
Yeah.
third or second Aspect Emperor book. I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah. Yeah. Once I've read them, I will absolutely watch those, and I will leave like long ass Steven Erikson-esque kind of comments on it.
As soon as you read them, we'll have a discuss. We'll do videos because I would love to talk to you about them. I would love to hear your takes on it.
I'm up for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm kind of curious because like you've read so much stuff. Where did you begin with like what happened to get you into fantasy? At what point in your life? What was the first work? And then like what happened?
All right, so I started like old school. I started with The Hobbit,
All right.
and I wanted to read Lord of the Rings because they were on my mom's bookshelf, and like in the German translation at the time. Like the old German translation. There's an important difference for people in Germany that will understand. They got retranslated. The new translation is difficult, and I understand the problems with like translating and stuff, but there were some choices in there where I'm like, you're losing some of the nuance in there. Anyway, point is the first one is extremely well done. Like people trying to actually find German like equivalents for a word like Rivendell, which is possible.
Is it?
Yes. The German word is Bruchtal, which like literally means like Tal is a valley or vale or whatever, because German doesn't have that many like synonyms for like a valley. So you get the Dell, and Ravenbruch is a break or stuff like that. So it does work, but it's very easy to just use Rivendell because not many English people actually know that Rivendell actually means something. You know what I mean? I hope I'm not insulting anyone, but I know English like native speakers that are like Rivendell means something. I'm like, yeah, it does.
I mean, I don't think I'm not offended, and I didn't know.
So anyway, so that's sort of how I started. And then she's like, "No, you're too young to read." And I was like 13, and she's like, and then I started reading those. That was like back in the day when I could still actually see and I wasn't blind. So I read those in like the German translation as printed books. And then I moved straight into the Silmarillion at the time. And that's sort of when I like my vision actually really declined harshly. I remember, like, seriously, I remember I was, I don't know, 14, 15. I was in like a summer holiday, which was like a horse riding holiday because I did a lot of horse riding at the time. And I remember I was like doing like horse riding trips over the like during the day for like 10 hours, and then in the evening I was reading The Two Towers.
Wow.
And then I moved from that to like the Silmarillion. That's sort of when like my vision kind of declined so far that I actually couldn't continue reading the book. I went like through most like through the first part, and I was like somewhere in the Wars of Beleriand, and I think it went all as far as the Children of Húrin, basically. And that's sort of when I just couldn't continue reading it in like any meaningful way. And at the time, my mother, who was awesome, actually went and like actually read that stuff for me on tape and sent me those tapes so I could continue the Silmarillion.
Wow.
And then I kind of moved on from that and didn't listen to anything for a while because, there's a lot of like personal stuff involved. It's like I can't, like, listening to stuff. It's sort of like admitting that you can't do something that you're supposed to do, right? It's a bit of
Mm.
like an admission of failure, even though it's obviously not a failure. It's nothing that you can actually change, but it's like a personal thing that is really hard to overcome.
Yeah.
So I didn't read for a long time. Then I came back and was like, okay, I'm going to read that shit in English now. And my English was much worse back then. I mean, not that it's perfect by now, but you know what I mean. And I went through that, and I listened to audiobooks of Lord of the Rings, the old school one read by Rob Inglis, which is actually fantastic because he sings all those songs, and it's so ridiculous and it's so fun. and then there's like the great mystery, which is like, how did I actually start reading The Black Company? Which is like the thing that I read afterwards was, for some reason, The Black Company is not huge in America, but The Black Company is even more unknown in Germany. And it's like, for some reason, I have no idea how I actually ended up there. I started reading The Black Company. And the other thing that I started reading at the time was A Game of Thrones. It was like in 2005. I was at university, and I met a friend at the time, and he was like, I just got this from my friend from the US. You got to read this. It's awesome. And like we'd spoken about like Tolkien nerd things before, and I just like, he just got like a paperback of Game of Thrones, and he just handed that to me, and it's like, I started reading Game of Thrones in 2005, and I was done with Storm of Swords way before Feast for Crows came out. And I'm like, okay, what am I going to do now? And I spent too much time on George R. R. Martin's website, and he's like, you know what? There's this author that I really, really love, and while you're waiting for Feast for Crows, maybe y'all should go and check out Robin Hobb.
Oh yeah.
And I'm like, okay, I'm gonna try this like Farseer thing. And that's when I started reading Farseer and then Lifeship Traders. And
That's awesome.
So George R. R. Martin is to blame for me liking Robin Hobb.
Hey, me too. That's so funny because it's fantasy as it ought to be written. So I just was waiting to fit that tagline in here somewhere. So I didn't know that you had read Hobb. Actually, I didn't know.
Oh no! I see that's one of those things that I read Hobb. I'm gonna start a reread of Farseer, hopefully this weekend or next week, because I'm doing it with like a friend who's never read anything of the sort before, and I'm like really looking forward to that. I read like Assassins, like the Farseer trilogy and Lifeship Traders, somewhere between 2007 and 2012.
Nice.
And then I kind of stopped. I bought all the other books, and I haven't actually gotten to actually reading them. There was some, disconnect. I was into something else at the time. I haven't gone beyond those first two like series.
Yeah.
But I want to read the rest. And I'm really interested to see how I will like deal with Farseer nowadays.
I imagine you would still probably like it.
I know I'm gonna like it, but I'm like my problem is not my problem. My question is like I've become a more political reader over the last couple of years, as people who actually watch my videos can probably tell. I was like, in my memory, Farseer is not a very political text. It's very focused on like the personal relations and stuff like that. And I'm like, will I just, go and read that? And I'm like, gods, when is she actually going to challenge the patriarchy? And I'm like, she's not. Or is she? So I'm really looking forward to finding out how I'll just, from that more political lens that I have these days, how will I think about it nowadays?
Yeah, I mean, it's always interesting, and I think AP has said it before, but the books read us, right? Whenever we go back to them and we change as people, and
yeah.
I think you are going to have so much to say about the future stuff, the Tawny Mans, and with Fits in the Fool. I would, man, that would be very fun. I hope you make videos on those. I hope you do.
Yeah, if I go that far, I'll definitely. I mean, I will read them and I will make videos on them. It's the curse of the content creator. Now, Do you find it hard to read books and not talk about them on the internet?
So, I almost feel so no, because there
Mhm.
are books that everyone has said everything about. So, First Law is like one of my favorite series, like the
Yeah,
original trilogy, and I have barely talked about it on my channel in a
yeah,
actual uploaded video because everyone has said everything that needs to
yeah,
be said at this point,
yeah.
and I
Like
just don't have anything to add, you know?
yeah, it's like I did one on Sandang Glocta because I felt like I had to say something on like the
Excellent video.
depiction of like disability,
Mhm.
but I felt that that's like a personal thing.
That
And
was excellent.
I don't have to do like here's why the heroes is great because you know that it's great.
There's at least some people out there that believe it's great, right? You know
Yeah.
what I feel bad? I feel bad whenever like someone recommends me a book and I read it and I enjoy it, and they're like, "All
Mhm.
right, so when are you gonna do the video?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm not making a video because I just don't have enough
No.
to say about it. I've already like I read it." Like there's always books like that that I enjoy, and I'm just like, "That's enough for me." Like I don't
Yeah.
know if I
Yeah.
need to talk about this book, you know?
Yeah, yeah. I find this like kind of interesting because there's always that expectation that, oh, you're a booktuber. You got to talk about the books you read. It's like, no, there's books I set aside. I'm going to read that just for myself and no
Yes.
one else.
There are
And
times where that's more enjoyable if I'm being completely honest.
you got to deal with that.
Yeah, and you know, the best books are the ones I want to talk about though, because like that's what drove me to the channel. It's what got me really back into reading is the
Mm,
community aspect of it. And um, man, like I think of Malazan, I think of Prince of Nothing, I think of the Robin Hobb books, and
mhm.
even like stuff like Stormlight Archive. Like I enjoy talking about that stuff for all different reasons too, which I think is one of the best parts about fantasy and how broad it is because they all bring something different to the table.
Yeah. I mean, like that's like the other part that is really important. We kind of, I mean, we're all like, it's great to talk about, but I think that's like the strength of what we do in booktube and in general is that in general, as humanity, we have that ongoing conversation where we're trying to actually figure out what it means to be human.
Hmm.
And literature is one aspect of that. But literature doesn't work as just you sit down, you read the book, you think your thoughts, and then you move on. It's an ongoing discourse. Those are like things thrown into the discourse, and we need to talk about that stuff. We need to actually have conversations about things and continue with that. And say something and then someone else says something and we continue moving on, which is why stuff like Stephen Erikson commenting and bringing his works into that and his thoughts into that. It doesn't change my opinion of the book that he wrote, but I can now have a conversation and it adds to the conversation because that's like what literature does at the end of the day is it helps us understand what it means to be human.
Yeah. That's a beautiful way to put it, man. And that's like, and I don't think you're like the biggest John Gwynne fan in the world, but a lot of people
No.
hate on The Faithful and the Fallen for being kind of popcorn fantasy. But you know what that series did? It sparked a
Hmm.
lot of conversation for me about relationships with people,
Hmm.
and loyalty. And yeah,
Yeah.
sure, it's not McCarthy, but I'll be damned if I didn't take something away from that and have some really good quality conversations that made me think afterwards.
Yeah, at the end of the day, any book that makes you think is a good book.
Yeah.
And I've not read Faithful in the Fallen because once again, it's like I can get book 4.
You'd hate it. I'll be honest. I don't think you'd like it.
Like I've read book 1 and 2 of the Bloodsworn
Yes.
saga, and no, it doesn't work for me.
Yeah. I've seen your extensive
And I'm
thoughts.
not saying like I have like very specific things that just like make it not work for me. I do get like the things he does, and he does a lot of things really well. Like the well, Philip Chase is always harping about like the found family kind of thing. He does that insanely well. I like that. It's good. It's not the kind of thing I want in a book.
Mhm.
And the stuff it did, especially with Shadow of the Gods, where I could like see all the plot twists coming like 10 chapters in advance. I'm like, dude, you call your character Varg. What's he gonna be? Let me guess.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's fair. I think that especially with that, because there's so much Nordic inspiration that like it's not so much a reinventing of the wheel as it is a inspirational, like
I mean,
inspired
I
story.
love I love the world. The world he's built is really cool. And the idea is what happens after the gods have died? How do we deal with that? there's a lot of questions, and then he just tells like a normal like personal like adventure story. I think that's sort of like my issue. Is like I wish he would tackle like the actual philosophical questions and not just the like family questions.
Yeah, the interpersonal stuff. Yeah, I think that's fair.
And he's good at the interpersonal stuff. It's a bit like, crude, but it's not badly done or anything. And I just like hate like the amount of just like pseudo like not pseudo, but reenactment stuff he puts in. And that might be because I have like a lot of friends or acquaintances that have done a lot of like Norse reenactment stuff. I've heard so many people talk about null bending so many times, and I'm like, I'm done with it. I fucking know
it out.
It's better than knitting. I understand how it's done. And you're like, he takes his null binding cap and he wrings out the sweat and he puts his null binding cap back on. And have we talked about his null binding cap? Dude, shut it, man.
For me, I hadn't done a lot of Nord stuff, right? And I haven't read a bunch of it. So for me, it was almost like a gateway. And then I started looking into stuff I wanted to read, building out the TBR. So in that regard, it actually helped me a little bit.
Oh, there's one you really got to read. And that's in English, it's called The Longships by Frans Bengtsson.
Okay.
In Swedish, it's Röder Orm, and it's from like the 40s.
Longships.
It's a Viking adventure story, and it's insanely cool. So it's written in the 40s.
Yeah, 1941. Yep.
Yeah, it took a while, like 40. There's like two parts, like 41 to 46. So you have to imagine this is like 40s Sweden. There's Germany sort of in the country and stuff like that. And he writes a story about this Viking that goes over, sails to Spain, finds this Jewish friend who's like a sympathetic character, and then they, do stuff in Muslim-occupied Spain and do stuff afterwards. It's insanely cool. It's like one of the best adventure stories you're ever going to read, and it's really cool.
Well, I wrote it down.
I'm pretty sure you love it, and more people outside of Sweden should actually read that.
Well, I wrote it down. You know what I've really enjoyed that's Nordic inspired is Vinland Saga. It's a manga. Oh my goodness. It's historical fiction, and I've really enjoyed it.
I've never gotten into manga for like obvious reasons.
Right. Fair enough.
Yeah.
That's
it's one closed book to me.
Yeah, that's totally fair.
AP
has a question for you. He said, "Can you ask Raph if he thinks if found family trope is gaining popularity because of a fragmented world and a sense of separation in modern society?"
My gut reaction is to say yes. My gut reaction is say yes. I'm not that much of a fan of the found family trope, but yeah. I'm a contrary bastard. It's like, yeah, I have issues with my family, but I'll be damned before I actually just give in to the first found family I find. You know what I mean?
I'm shopping around.
No, I'm just like, fuck it. But like, I do agree. I do agree that like the idea of a found family is definitely becoming more popular. It feels like that.
Well, I think also,
I mean, there's like explicit things like, the Bloodsworn stuff, which is like very much like, especially like Varg and the Bloodsworn, and like, it's very in your face. But then you have a, more like, more like military fantasy, and I don't want to go like all the way to the Malazan, or even like, Black Company does start with that kind of stuff when it's like, yeah, we're basically all kind of losers that had like all kinds of reasons to run away, but now we have this brotherhood, now we do that thing. And that's sort of where that starts, and I think it might have a connection to that level of when being part of the military stopped being, absolute heroes. And it's more like, yeah, but we're kind of losers, but we have to do this job. And that's sort of what kind of makes us into like a family. So I would say like in a more like an American context, maybe like the whole Vietnam, we've gone through some shit together kind of thing, did have an influence on that whole like found family kind of thing as well. And you combine that with, what you said, what AP said, like the shattering of society, and then you get like to where like found families become so very, very popular
Yeah.
nowadays.
Yeah, and obviously going through very traumatic events can also be very bonding. I remember
Yeah.
Alan talking about like whenever the hurricane hit Florida and him and his
Yeah.
wife, before they were dating at the time.
Hmm.
He said that was a big moment. He was like it was her family and his, I think maybe his family, and they were kind of hunkered down going through this hurricane. It was really terrifying. And he was like,
Yeah.
that builds a bond.
Yeah, of course. No, I mean, I'm not going to like devalue any of that. I would say I think it's been on the rise for a long time, and I would say like that whole like once being part of the military is sort of something that you afterwards have to defend. It's sort of where that this is my family kind of thing became a thing.
It's interesting. I like what Mitch said here. He said, I think it's because of the Fast and Furious movie franchise.
I have avoided all the Fast and the Furious movies.
The first one's not bad for like a romp.
I know. So here's the thing: is like at the time, I didn't go to that because I was like, I don't know, 15, 16 when the first one came out, and I was having beef with like two of my friends, and they went to Fast and the Furious like 3 times. They loved, and I'm like, I'm not gonna watch that movie because those fuckers. And that's why I never watched Fast and the Furious.
That's why you never got on the Vin Diesel fan wagon, right? It's called a fan wagon.
Exactly.
I like that.
And he even plays Dungeons and Dragons.
Wait, does he really?
Yeah, he talked about Vin Diesel for a while was like very much on like I'm actually a nerd kind of train.
Hey, I'm all about the fit nerd. I'm all about that. I love it. I'm living that life.
I'm very much the unfit nerd.
No, but you're working out. You're hitting the gym.
I am back to that. I did like a lot of sports when I was younger, and then like I lost track for a while. It's like I hate the gym.
Mm-hmm.
I hate the gym, but for me, it's like the only thing I can do. It's like I broke my arm and my collarbone playing football. My football, I mean, like proper football, which is soccer to you.
Yes.
And I've done like rowing in a team, but I live in a town that doesn't have like an actually like rowable river. I've done horse riding. I've done a lot of sports in the past, and then at this point, I'm like, yeah, the only thing I can do if I actually want to stay fit is the gym. So I have to go to that, weird machine place and do stuff.
The weird machine place. I love
that. My gym is like fully automated. So every like every 6th time I go there, they like do these like strength tests where you just like pull and they just like adjust your weights automatically and stuff. And I'm like,
nice.
I've never been on board with the rebellion against Skynet until I actually went to that gym. I can't say I didn't do anything because like the plague and everything for like 2 years, and I come back and I do my first like pulling weights, and it's like, all right, we'll just add 13 kilos to your thing, which is like around 30 pounds, and I'm like,
it's a big jump.
Yeah, it's like I haven't done anything in the last 2 years. What do you think? Where did that come from? I'm like, all right, I'll join the rebellion right now. You're done, machine overlords.
Do you have any favorite narrators that you go like for audiobooks?
Not really. So here's the thing: is like I think because I'm basically forced to just live with audiobooks.
Yeah,
I'm just happy if it exists in audio. So I don't have that like. You have like these people that go like, oh, I will not listen to that because I hate that voice. And I'm like, dude, I'm happy it exists. I'll just like live with that. So it kind of depends. I think there's like some matches that work really well. I'm not going to go to the Dresden thing right now. I think Jonathan Davis is someone that I have almost formed an attachment to because he's done like a lot of audiobooks that I've listened to a lot of times and listened to early on. He's done the Book of the New Sun stuff by Gene Wolfe. He's done Snow Crash by Neil Stevenson, which is one of my favorite books of all time, and it's. Have you ever read Snow Crash?
I have not. So the last time I mentioned it, I was like, yeah, it's a book I really want to read. And like, I remember the chat blew up.
It's the book that made me actually take a semester of ancient Sumerian language at university.
Wow.
And it's super funny. And so I finally got around to reading a book that Stephen Erikson recommended to me last year, which is The Origin of Consciousness in the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind. And I read that, and I 2 chapters in, like, I bet Neil Stevenson read that before he wrote Snow Crash. And I'm like, I started Googling. It's like, yeah, Stevenson has publicly acknowledged that he read that book before he wrote that. It's like, yes, I got it.
It's so funny because that's the book that after I did my podcast with Erikson, I bought that, and then I bought The Dawn of Everything, which I think you completed today, right?
I completed it today, and it is absolutely amazing. It's incredibly well written, and there's like a thing that I want to do a video on that at some point. The grand theory and how it actually influences novelists, because there's a lot of, like, you know, nonfiction books that have a huge impact on how people write books. And I'm not going to judge Jane's like bicameral mind theory here, because I'm not qualified to.
Me either.
But the point is that those kind of theories, those grand theories, have an attraction that then takes your mind, or like an author's mind, and makes you start thinking about stuff. And they're highly inspirational in a lot of ways, and have a huge influence on what happens afterwards. And like, there's other books like that. There's certainly James Fraser's The Golden Bough, which has like had a huge influence on so many people over like the last century and a bit. Or Robert Graves' The White Goddess is another one of those. Like, The White Goddess is complete bonkers. It's nothing there is scientifically correct, or almost nothing there is scientifically correct, but it's highly inspirational, and people going like, wow, that makes for a great story. And you know what? That's the job of fiction. The job of fiction is taking those things and going and running with it, and imagining what you can do with that, and imagining that in your worlds, and going like, what if that were true? Let's see and play that out, because you don't have to actually, you know, satisfy academic, you know, grades or anything of the sort. So that's how we actually figure stuff out as a species, is sometimes just by imagining and following through into like the world of the imaginary, from like basis of like these kind of grand theories, because science as a whole is kind of boring. I mean, no, science is awesome, but science on like an academic level is like, you use something, you look at the stats, and you
going
you
in
try
and
to push
doing the work,
like one thing slightly further and further and further, and you do that, and it doesn't capture the imagination. So those like grand theories, like, I figured it out, go, is like so influential in a way. And even if they don't actually, if they're not true, it's still fun to read that stuff and go like, wow.
Oh, definitely. And I think that that's one of the coolest things about science fiction, more than fantasy, is that like it could be literally our world, and it's one piece of tech or science or information, and it changes the entire dynamic of how we exist, right? Like if you took a cell phone and threw it back in like 1920, could you imagine? You'd be a god.
So here's the funny thing. So have you ever read Neuromancer or any of the cyberpunk stuff?
No, I have not.
And that's the thing. Like Neuromancer and the short stories, which are even better, by William Gibson, no one has cell phones in that era. He wrote that in like the early 80s. No one thought about cell phones. He has this like weird, like, that would, from now our point of view, look super retro kind of aesthetic. And like everyone has like, you know, surfing the net, having these like hairbands with like trodes on their head and stuff, and going into like the cyberspace and shit like that. But no one actually has cell phones in those worlds, because no one thought about that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, 11/22/63 by Stephen King is a time travel novel, and one of
I
the
know.
things, yeah, one
I
of
hate
the
it.
I loved it. It was like one of my favorite books, but
I think like it's no, my issue was there like a couple of things in there where it felt like someone actually in the editing process overlooked something because there were like inconsistencies where I'm like, no, this doesn't make sense. You know, it's like the guy that did that stuff when in the betting bureau back then. It's like, no, that was the other guy. And I'm like, some editor should have just figured out that he used the wrong fucking name. It's just a name change. And I'm like, I'm annoyed now.
well, Raph, it's all about the story.
I know. But come on. This is like a multi-million like
bestseller,
release best-selling author. Someone should just like check the names.
Well, one of the things that I really liked about the adaptation is that they utilized a cell phone when he went back in time, and it's only one scene, and then it like breaks or something, right? Because like you can't have a cell phone; it's way too OP. So they have this like little scene where he uses the cell phone, and it's a major like distraction, and it's just I love that. And I love that idea that, you know, that Neuromancer was written back then with the idea of cell phones. It sounds really interesting. And Nick from chat says Gibson wrote Neuromancer on a typewriter, which is kind of funny.
There's like a forward. Yeah, that's crazy. But there's like a forward to like the 25-year whatever anniversary edition, where he talks about like how it hasn't aged well. It's like the opening paragraph is like the sky was the color of a television tuned to a dead channel. And he's like, in 2005, no one knows what I meant by that.
Wow, that is crazy. Yeah, you don't really think about that, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of those things that doesn't translate over the ages. It's also interesting to see like old sci-fi, what they thought the future would be. Like Asimov, like thought everything would be nuclear.
Have you ever read The Stainless Steel Red by Harry Harrison?
I have not.
Harry Harrison wrote that other story, Make Room, which we all know about the movie called Soil and Green. Anyway, if you don't know, do you know the Futurama episode when they go back in time and they order like a soil and green and a soil and orange and a soil and cola? That's like sort of when they're making fun of that. Anyway, my point is, it's like a 50s, early 60s sci-fi series. It's super fun. It's like slightly humorous and everything. And there's a scene where the guy gets like packed into a spaceship as a convict and he has to go somewhere else. And what he does to actually escape that is he kind of frees himself through some contortions and shit. He goes into like the cockpit, which is like automated, and he takes out some of the punch cards from the computer and he punches in some extra holes so the spaceship flies somewhere else. And I mean, like, holy fucking cow, that shit does. I mean, talk about technology not aging.
Yeah, not aging at all. In a very dangerous
It's just
way.
ridiculous. I read that for the first time, like, wow.
Yeah, I thought it.
Like in 1960, that's like a really clever thing. It's like he goes and he just like actually punches in some extra holes and he goes somewhere else. I'm like, wow.
It's that easy.
Yeah.
It's like the Jetsons, right? Jetsons were, you know, a cartoon, obviously, and based in, I think, right around coming up, right? It was in like 2023 or something like that. Is like when it's supposedly takes place, and all the ideas of the future, and you have the robot maid. And all right, first off, why do I not have a robot dishwasher? Okay, like we have all these amazing things. I just want a robot that that does it, and everyone's to say that's a dishwasher. No. I want it to put the dishes away. That's the worst part of washing dishes.
Yeah.
Where is it, folks? Somebody get Apple on it.
Yeah, no. It's a problem. I was promised flying cars. I don't know.
Where are we? We can't even get automated vehicles.
Why I don't get a flying car, but that's like a different thing.
I would ride in a flying car with you, Raph. I'd do it. Maybe a sky keep too. Why not?
What could possibly happen? Them taking away my license?
Yeah, they have to catch us first, man.
Exactly.
Vasco asked, "Have you guys ever read Do Androids Androids Dream of Electric Sheep by Philip
Yes.
K. Dick.
And it's so much more depressing than the movie, which is saying a lot.
I have not seen the movie, nor have
you
I
have
read the
not
book.
seen Blade Runner?
So here's my problem with Blade Runner. There's like 4 different versions or something, and everyone's like, you gotta make sure to watch this one. And then every time I go to watch it, I just get flustered because I'm like, I don't know which one this is, and then I panic, and then I just don't watch it.
Here's the deal. There's one version you should not watch. All the others are safe.
Okay. It's the narrator.
The cinematic release with the tacked on ending is the one you don't want to watch.
Okay.
All the others are safe. It has to end without the happy end.
Okay.
That's the trick. Because the happy end was like added because they're like did like some test screenings. Everyone was like, oh gods. And they're like, we add like a happy ending. And that's not in the story. And the story to Android's Dream of Electric Sheep is so much more depressing. It has way less action than the movie. And it's super dark and it's super depressing. And everyone is just like sad and trying to actually prove that they're human and trying to keep their like animals. Because like being able to keep an animal, like a pet, is sort of like the proof that they're actually human. And the main character is written from the main character's perspective, and he's trying to do that. And he finally has that pet, and I think it's like it's a praying mantis or something. And he has that praying mantis, and it ends with him finding out that the praying mantis actually has like a battery case. It's actually an artificial animal, and he's just completely fucked.
Oh my god, Philip K. Dick, someone next year I'm going to try to make it a priority because his books aren't very long.
Philip K. Dick is the master of insanely cool story titles, and also the master of like really hurting you when you're reading his stories.
Well,
all of them.
I like all of that. I like catchy titles. I like being hurt emotionally.
Have you read Ubik?
I have not.
Ubik is like Ubik is very much going to mess with your brain.
Okay, so Ubik. What's the? I assume that's the author, right? So what's his best book?
No. Ubik is another Philip K. Dick story.
Oh. Okay, Ubik. Let me see. Okay, Dick. I'm trying to look it up right now.
That one's really going to mess with your brain.
All right, I'll put it on the TBR. I'll try to get to that one first.
I mean, they're like all rather short. I mean, that's like the advantage of Philip K. Dick, that most of them are fairly short stories.
That's something I think I can just get them on audio, and that can be something I listen to, because I listen to sometimes at the gym, especially I'm stretching. So yeah. I stretch for anywhere between 20 to 30 minutes easily. So like it's a good chunk of audiobook at like a 1.5 or a 2.
I know, like 30 minutes of cardio. That's usually where I listen to a lot of audios. Like I'm running,
really?
And it's boring and it's boring and it's boring, but I listen to something interesting. And
see, whenever I do cardio, I'm mad because I don't want to be doing cardio. So I listen to angry music.
Cardio sucks. But I found that like when I do something like very repetitive physical, I can concentrate well. And that's why I listen to like audiobooks when I'm doing cardio. It's like something's actually happening, and I can concentrate on the story and forget that I'm actually doing something really stupid and repetitive.
Yeah, I could see that. Sometimes in cardio, I let my brain wander. That's the only problem. That happens almost any time whenever I do audio now. Omar has commented and said, Ubik is supposedly inspiration for the name Miura gave one of the God Hand, the one on the island. Apparently, he named that God Hand after sci-fi titles. Oh, this is some Berserk trivia. Okay, very cool. Thank you, Omar.
I don't know about Berserk. My flatmate knows about Berserk. He loves Berserk.
Ruth and Bad knows about Berserk. I got to get him on.
I know. It's the manga thing.
Yes.
I have avoided Japanese culture as much as possible.
Why is that?
Yeah, it's like I read one Murakami novel, and I was not ready for like magical realism at the time. And it really didn't sit well with me, and I haven't gone back to that. And like the whole like manga and anime culture just like passed me by because it's so visual.
Right. Well, that's fair. Yeah.
I might return to Murakami at some point, but 1Q84 really didn't sit well with me at the time.
Well, I'm sure there's a plethora of other authors out there, right, that you could
Oh
probably
yeah.
do. So,
It's more one of those like there's so much out there.
yeah,
You know that problem is like I know if I start looking into that, I'll just open up another rabbit hole,
I feel
and
that.
I'm already swamped with stuff. I can't do that as well because I know it'll just like add more stuff.
Oh, dude, I do the random patron wheel where I let a patron pick like a random
Mhm.
book, right? And so it was We Ride the Storm by Devin Madsen, and it's it's by Orbit. I thought it would be kind of like a romping good time, kind of fast paced, and it is. But it was a
Mhm.
lot. It was actually better than I thought it would be. It's like one of the bigger surprises of the year for me. And now I'm like, there's 3 other ones. When am I going to read those? Because now I need to finish the series, but I'm in the middle of like 5 other series, and I'm like,
What's the
God.
book called?
We Ride the Storm by Devin Madsen.
Never heard
So
that.
yeah, it's has some Asian inspiration there.
Hmm.
It is very interesting for the fact that I love the way the POVs interact with each other, and it's kind of like really smooth. Like they're not always in the same spots, and
Hmm.
the plot's good. I think the plot's the main point of the book. The characters aren't like the greatest realized in the world, but they
Yeah.
have like quirks about them that make them memorable. Like they're not the best, but they're good
Yeah.
enough. And it just, I don't know. I had a really good time with it. Also, I thought the audiobook was decent. So I got through it pretty quick for how busy
Okay.
my week was. But now I have another like 5 book series that I'm like, great. When am I finishing this one?
Yeah. Here's
Impossible.
the thing. What's your favorite book that you've read so far this year?
So I've been saying Wall of Storms by Ken Liu. It's the
Everyone says that. I haven't read it yet.
I really, really, really like it.
Mhm.
I- Man, put me on the spot because there's been so many. Like, so just some other ones off the top of my head that are competing. Both Dust of Dreams and The Crippled God, because I read
Yeah,
those
of
this
course.
year.
Hmm.
I think I might have read Toll the Hounds this year. I have to go check my Goodreads. If I read Toll the Hounds, that could be it, right? Stoner by John Williams, which is not a fantasy book, so nobody wants to hear about that. But I think Stoner by John Williams is
It's been sort of on my list for a long time. I just haven't gotten to the Stoner.
it's so good. I think it's in the US. It's free on Audible, so it might be free for you. I'm not sure, but
Yeah. It's sort of like one of those like for people like you and me, it's like we do read that stuff that's not fantasy, like your McCarthy and
yes,
things like that. You ever tried reading Thomas Pynchon?
I have not. No.
It might be a bit too verbose because it's like the absolute opposite of McCarthy in a lot of ways.
Hmm.
But it is like on the more like postmodern side of things, it's absolutely fantastic in a lot of ways. It does like a lot of so his big theme is sort of like the breakdown of like norms and that small time space when there was actually a possibility for like a different kind of future that then was taken over by the man. So if you go and read The Dawn of Everything, you might actually vibe with that.
Okay, cool. Yeah, Dawn of Everything's one I'd like to get to. It's a little bit of a bigger
It's
book.
so good. It's like I mean, I'm obviously can't judge the anthropology of it, but the way it is written, it's extremely well written.
Mhm.
There's a series of science books by Terry Pratchett, or not only by Terry Pratchett, it's called The Science of Discworld, where Terry Pratchett teamed up with like 2 authors, 2 scientists to write like there's always like a chapter of Discworld and a chapter of explaining what he just did in Discworld into like actual like sort of pop science stuff and whatnot. And it has that slightly ironic, slightly acerbic kind of tone of like we're gonna overthrow like opinions here, and David Graeber and Vengro really don't like Jared Diamond's Guns, Germs, and Steel, which yeah, fair enough. It's not a good book. I mean, it's a very compelling book, but it tells a great story about like the stuff it builds on is unfortunately not very good.
Yeah. Dawn of Everything, I read the first chapter or 2 after Erikson recommended it, and I need to get back to it.
Oh, it's fantastic. I had so much fun reading that the last 2 days.
Yeah. Another book that has to be in my best of the year, has to be anything by R. Scott Baker I've read so far. So Judging Eye this year and White Luck Warrior books 1 and 2 of Aspect Emperor. Like, it's hard to like separate them into different books because I know they are, but like the story the first half is told is so good. It's so good.
Yeah. And I'm gonna get to all of those at some point.
What's the best book you've read this year, man?
For me, Eversion by Alistair Reynolds.
Oh yeah, you were really big on that. Yeah.
So I've been a fan of Alistair Reynolds for a long time, like ever since I read Chasm City all the way back in 2007 or 2008, I think. And that one is so it's a standalone. He's done like a bunch of series and they're all really good. And there's one thing that I really appreciate about Alistair Reynolds, which is he's aware of the fact that he's like a white male dude, like from England, writing science fiction, and he's consciously trying to write less very classic science fiction about like white English speaking dudes having adventures in space, and I appreciate that a lot. And Eversion does something very specific, and it's like I can't talk about why it's so great because it's one of those like Sixth Sense kind of spoiler things. There's like the story is built on like one central mystery that you need to actually experience on your own.
Okay.
But it made me cry.
Well, when a book does that,
it does something that I personally appreciate a lot, which is it references a lot and plays a lot with like different eras of science fiction literature and the styles of like, your 19th century old school Edgar Allan Poe Adventure of Arthur Gordon Pym style of like weird sea travel, and then it goes on into like other like eras of science fiction, and he does all of that. And then there's like a mystery at the core of it that just like asks that one important question, like what does a human actually make a human?
It's a question we're still trying to figure out, I think.
Yeah, but he asks that in an amazing way, and it just made me cry when I read it. It's like, holy shit.
Yeah.
you just made me cry for something I never thought I would.
Yeah, I think Alistair Reynolds, I have a bunch of his audiobooks actually, but I think Eversion might be the first one I try just because it is it's a standalone, right? Like
it's a standalone. It does not connect to anything else. It's fairly short. He has this other thing that I really love. How to say it? So it's not a YA story, but it's about like two teen girls being space pirates, and it's awesome.
Is that
when I say space pirates, I mean like, so he has this world. It's like Revenger and the other books afterwards. So the idea is that like spaceships run like on these like sails that use like the solar wind. So it does use like basic like actual like sailing ships kind of thing, and then they're driving around like in outer space and salvaging stuff from like old planets that have been abandoned. And then they're fighting pirates, and it's awesome.
Yeah, that sounds.
It's pirates in space.
And I do know there is some efforts, and maybe even already been succeeded, that are using solar wind or photons to push a light sail towards longer or two longer distances away from us. McScarfield has a question. Said, Raph, would you recommend By Force Alone by Lavi Tidhar?
Yes, I would. It's insanely cool.
What's it about?
It's someone taking an axe to everything you ever thought about King Arthur.
Okay, I'm in. That sounds interesting.
Now, Lavi Tidhar is one of my favorite authors of all time. It's like the level of like just sheer so a while ago, Richard K. Morgan, author of Steel Remains, says, like, I met the guy and he's a riot. And that's true. And like everything Lavi Tidhar writes is worth reading. It is, however, always like very much going to like the pain threshold and beyond. And By Force Alone is him taking apart the Arthurian legend with a vengeance. And there's a political background, and he just like really tests out like how far can you go with all of that, and it's crazy cool, but it's also like you should not have too much of an attachment to it, which is part of the point, right? He's calling the series, and he's done like a second one. It's called The Hood on Robin Hood.
I have heard of that.
And he calls it the anti-matter of Britain. So he takes like the matter of Britain and looks at like, what are those legends that are sort of like integrated into like a national character or into like a national mythology? And what's like the actual basis for that? And aren't those people actually pretty fucking bad? And shouldn't we maybe think about that again? And by force alone is basic. King Arthur is, it starts out with King Arthur being like a drug lord in London.
That's awesome.
in like Roman occupied London, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
And then it just like bends the rules of the genre, and you have like the whole Grail quest, which is sort of like a persiflage, like it's sort of like a parody of Stalker. You know, the computer game and the movie, and it's like going into like a radioactively contaminated area and taking out artifacts and stuff. That's how the Grail quest works out in that book.
Dude,
he does the same thing in The Hood. And there's like one part in The Hood that I just like love. You know, like the Robin Hood story about the Guy of Gisborne who's sent to actually kill Robin Hood.
Yeah.
So in The Hood, he switches the narrative to like a first-person narrative. And Guy of Gisborne's trip up to Nottingham to go and kill Robin Hood is basically a retelling of Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad, where Robin Hood is basically Colonel Kurtz from, you know, Apocalypse Now, which is, you know, the Vietnam version of Heart of Darkness. And he starts like, yeah, I talked to those people in northern France, and they told me I have to go up there and have to be careful, and we lost control of the guy, and and he does all of these things. I can't speak highly enough of like Lavi Tidar. I know AP hated like the second person narrative of The Hood, but like there's very few people out there right now that do as that go as far when it comes to just like taking the genre of fantasy fiction as Lavi Tidar does. It's insane.
And seeing it from a new perspective and a new take, I mean, is always something that for me, I'm willing to check out just to see how it's done.
All right, there's one that if you want to really get your mind fucked by Lavi Tidar, go read A Man Lies Dreaming. And I'll say this with all the precautions that are necessary. This is a book that is going to trigger all of your reflexes and all of the rest. It's a story about a German private detective in the late 30s in London. a German private detective who was in power in Germany until like 34, until like a putsch succeeded, and now he's trying to make his, you know, way in London, while the Mosley regime is bringing fascism in London, actually in England, actually to power. And it goes from there. It does like insane stuff.
And this is Where Men Lie. Is that
A Man Lies Dreaming? Because here's the thing: it's like this. Okay, I'm not good with spoilers. I think it's important to understand why it is that brutal, because you have that story, which is a detective story in London, and Adolf Hitler is basically your viewpoint character. He's a private detective in London and stuff like that. And then it switches. And you understand that all of that is a fever dream of a Jewish author dying in Auschwitz.
Oh, wow.
And that's when it just like hits you in the guts.
Yeah, wow.
And then it adds like another layer to that on why this is actually relevant.
Wow. And I have never heard of any of these. You've extended my TBR quite a bit, which I'm happy about, but also like I didn't need any more, you know? Like
Tidar is one of those authors I really love because he does push boundaries a lot.
Yeah.
He's got a fantastic blog post somewhere where he was like, steampunk is fascism for nice people. And then people got really angry. And he's like, yeah, you know what? I wrote like a lot of like steampunk novels and stuff. And here's my reasons why I say that. And then he writes like a story where he's like, yeah, steampunk could just as well be like a Nazi story. And he calls it like Dampfkraftmythen, which is like seriously just like a German translation of steampunk stories. And he writes this like incredibly fascist steampunk story, but like very Aryan blonde people saving people from those evil Jewish mad doctors and stuff. And it's super fun. He's like, you know, here you go.
Wow.
I love angry authors that actually go and, you know, try to actually make a point.
Yeah. Yeah, you definitely do like angry authors, that's for sure.
I'm an angry person.
You seem nice enough, Raph. You say you're angry all the time, but you seem nice enough, man.
Yeah.
Omar has a question for you. He said, have you read Conspiracy Against the Human Race by Thomas Ligotti? Only nonfic I've ever read, but wow, few insane read.
I have not. I am aware of it, but I have not.
I have not been aware of it, but I am also going to have to remember that one as well. Scarfield wants to know, have you read any GGK or Ken Liu?
I have not. I have all the GGK stuff in my Audible library, and I wanted to start reading it like in April, and then I got like distracted by all of that terrible Robert Jordan stuff, and then I had to do something to actually cleanse my soul, and I haven't gotten to GGK, but it's something I want. I want to read Guy Gravel K for the rest of the year, just as soon as I'm done with the Chronicles of Thomas Covenant. That's sort of the plan for the year.
I want to take this time to ask you, it's a challenge, actually.
All right.
I would like you to give me 3 things that you love about the Wheel of Time.
3 things.
Maybe that you liked about the Wheel of Time. 3 things.
All right. So here's the thing. I do appreciate about The Eye of the World is actually much better than people think it is. I think the opening of Wheel of Time does show very much Robert Jordan's like background in writing Conan pastiches. It does have a lot of like the Robert E. Howard like prose style that I personally, you know, because I'm a huge Robert E. Howard fan, I can live with that. That's great. There's that. I love that. What else do I like about the Wheel of Time?
You need 2 more.
I do think Robert Jordan is actually really good at doing cosmic horror.
Okay.
And I'm going to make it harder for me because I'm going to say that both the stuff he does in The Ways and the stuff he does in Shadar Logoth is really cool. Like the fog tentacles, that shit is great. And the stuff he does in The Ways with like the nameless wind, machine, that stuff is really cool. He's insanely good at cosmic horror. I wish he would actually, you know, had done more of that. That was really good. So that's 2.
When your teacher asks you to write 5 paragraphs and you only got a paragraph word, you got to make this shit stretch.
I love the flying dinosaurs. They're awesome.
Perfect.
What can I say? They're fucking awesome. I love the flying dinosaurs.
There it is. So Raph is confirmed not a Wheel of Time hater. He has things that he very much enjoys about Wheel of Time. I did watch your Wheel of Time videos up to what I watched, or what I read, I mean, because I only read up to book 5, and maybe one day I'll continue. But I tapped out, and I enjoyed listening to your takes of it. And I did think that, you know, you were harsh towards the work, but I also, you know, I thought you were fair for the most part. And you did have positives there. You know, you would mention whenever you would enjoy something. And I'm so glad that you liked Eye of the World as well, or at least parts of it, because I really liked Eye of the World and The Great Hunt. Like, I was in after Great Hunt. I was like, here comes the cavalry trope. I'm in. Like, I loved it.
Yeah. I think like there's like the three Wheel of Time videos I did at the end of it, where I looked at like the world building, the sexism, and the other stuff. Those are the ones where I actually like focus all the things that really annoyed me about. And like, I don't think Robert Jordan was a bad person.
Oh yeah.
I think it's like once again the same thing where he just like subconsciously takes a lot of the stuff that he grew up with and he just like takes all of that and just puts it into that book. And I'm like, dude.
In a big
Except
vat.
that one thing at the beginning of Fires of Heaven, which I really, dude, how that ever fucking passed any kind of like, I'm not gonna say editor, like any like publisher official is just beyond me. That whole idea of like at the beginning of Fires of Heaven, when they have that conversation, like, yeah, when you flirt too much, some man will not take no for an answer. And my my mother told me, if that happens, you have to abandon dignity and run. But my aunt said you have to abandon dignity and enjoy it. And I'm like, dude, how could that? Like, even in like the mid-90s, you should not be able to actually publish that kind of thing. That's just like, dude,
it was rough.
No, like seriously.
Yeah, it was a bit rough around the edges, eh?
No, that's just like, that's like a no-go. Like, seriously, don't do that shit, man.
Well, you made it through. You did all the videos.
I've made it through, and that was like important for me. Is like, it's easy to hate on Wheel of Time. It's super easy. It's like, no, I want to know what I'm talking about. I want to like, if someone tells me like I haven't read the whole thing, I'm gonna be able to say yes, I have read the whole thing. It's still bad, but I can quote.
So now you've covered this and you've done some other videos, but when people tune into your channel for the rest of the year, I heard you say Guy Gavriel, okay, Thomas Covenant. Is that what we can expect coming out of the channel for the rest of the year?
I don't know. So here's the thing: is like, I feel like I'm kind of moving away from these like daily. I read this. I'm annoyed about whatever. I don't want to go down that road. It's like it would be super easy, right? I could go and just like read all of R.A. Salvatore's writing, and I'll be set for the next 2 years, and I'll be angry every day. Trust me, I've read that shit before. I know, but I don't want to do that because I don't want to, I want to talk about stuff that interests me. And like for me, I'm interested in meaning, and I read books and I enjoy them. And there's like a bunch of things that I love about stories. That's either like about books. That's either the prose. If the prose is fantastic, I'll be like, wow, awesome. If the themes interest me, then I'll be down for that. And I need to figure out where to go with that because I'm currently like, doing a lot of like this meta stuff, like starting with that Orientalism thing. And I get more things in that like area where I want to look at when it comes to videos. I don't know. Seriously, I don't know. I'm going to read books now. I'm going to figure out what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to read them, basically.
Hey, that's all we can do, right?
Yes, there's something that I really want to look at. It's like an ongoing project. It's like so much of like fantasy or like classic fantasy is sort of built about this like pseudo medieval Europe stuff. And so much of that pseudo medieval Europe is basically a construct of 19th century romanticism. And that romanticism has like a very specific political agenda behind it, a very nationalist one. Dare I say anti-Semitic? Anyway, well, it is. Trust me. A point is, it's interesting to look at those things and maybe compare them to actual. How were the Middle Ages actually? And turns out they were quite different. They weren't as women got raped all the time and men were happy. That's not how that worked.
No, there's definitely a lot more to it than that.
That's stuff that I want to look at. It's like I don't want to parallel it to the Orientalism stuff that I did because it's a very different thing, but it's still like how we actually deal with like constructions that we're like sort of looking at, and we're just like unwittingly just like taking them on. It's like, no, that's not how it works, and we should maybe be aware of that. That's stuff that I want to do. I'm beyond that. I'm just going to read books, and when I get angry, I'll talk about it.
I like it. I like it. And I'll be very curious to see what you think of Thomas Covenant, because I've only read part of book 1, and
I
that's
have
something
finished book 1.
I'm gonna come back to it. At the time, I just wasn't in the mood for it.
Yeah, I get that.
I actually made it past the the very polarizing scene. That isn't why I stopped reading. I actually just was like, oh, this is like older mythological fantasy. I would like to this is not what I want right now. So I changed.
Yeah.
But I do plan on going back and reading Thomas Covenant at some point. So I wouldn't even consider that a DNF, but I'm very excited to see what you think of it. And maybe that'll get me back on the train to want to get through those. Cause there's 6? Yeah, there's 6 of them.
That's at this point, there's like 10.
Is it really? I only own 6.
I'm going to read the first 3, and then I'm going to talk about it, because I finished the first one, and the way the first one ends, I feel I need to read the second one to actually have like a perspective.
Yeah, that's fair. That happens a lot, right? The bigger series.
And like I want to know more before I make statements.
Yeah.
I do like a lot of the stuff that happens in Thomas Covenant. The way it's very much it's very heavy on the symbolism, and I'm like, I'm good with that. I love a lot, like, I mean, it's heavy in this. Like, you call him Thomas Covenant, the unbelievers, like Thomas the unbeliever, or the doubting Thomas. That there's something going on there, and someone is like using all them connections, and like so much of like the land is all about like the oath of peace is like the covenant of, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's all these like meanings in there, and I want to explore more of that. But I feel I need to read the whole trilogy before I have like a full full perspective, but like more of a perspective on that.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're already drawing out some of the things that I kind of picked up with the title and stuff. Then that's like one of the reasons why I wanted to go into that, because I love that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, I need to get back to it at some point. And I would really love to see you have some videos on that, breaking it down, making these kind of connections. Cause you know, even whenever you hate a book, I tend to hear you talk about it. It makes me want to read it. Like whenever you read Through the Wheel of Time, it made me kind of want to pick it back up. So I always appreciate hearing your perspective, man. I really do.
Thank you.
Absolutely. I think that is going to wrap it up for today. It's weird doing this on a Saturday afternoon because I still have to do things. You know what I mean? Like, usually it's Friday night. I do this, and I'm buzzing, and then I go read and I fall asleep. So it's going to be weird having to actually go do things today.
I'm going to reread the 21st Discourse novel, because we have like a really long discussion tomorrow morning and tomorrow evening. So I've got to reread that one.
Damn. Yeah. And that's, I wanted to we're going to have you back on, because I really wanted to hear more of your takes on Terry Pratchett as well. We have a lot to talk about, because we could talk about Malazan for 3.5 hours. So I'd love to have you back on if you'd be willing.
Sure. Always.
I appreciate you coming on today. Folks, I have Raph tagged down in the description. Go check out his channel here on YouTube and make sure to give him a subscription. Do you have any other socials or anything that they can follow you on, Raph?
I am on Twitter, but I don't do anything on there. And I'm on Instagram. I do even less on there.
That's how I work.
See, Instagram is kind of weird. It's like Instagram is all about pictures, and I'm like, how's that gonna work?
Fair, right? Well, everyone, please make sure go check out what Raph has done on his channel. Raph has a back catalog of some of the more in-depth stuff you're going to find here on the YouTube book sphere, or booktube as we call it. And I think that he has a lot of really quality things to say. And even if you don't agree with what he's saying, I think he does a really good job of presenting it and is always open to conversation. So Raph, thanks for that, man. Appreciate you.
Thank you, man.
Absolutely. And chat, thank you for being here after a very stressful week. To come here on a Saturday afternoon and hang out with all of you and to have this wonderful talk means the world to me. It genuinely does. And everyone, thank you so much for 9,000 subscribers. I don't really even know what to say, because I never thought that would be a thing. So
6,000 more to go.
Yeah, we're almost there, right? But I appreciate you guys so much. I love you. Raph, thanks again, man. I appreciate it. And until I see y'all next time, be good, be safe. Remember to always keep turning the page.